Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And welcome to another Monday Mini, where I just talk about personal things.
Excellent.
You ready for that, Anney?
I don't know. Am I?
That's a great question. Beforehand, I am going to put this trigger warning. I am going to talk about sexual abuse a little bit. And we're going to just talk about, uterus, vagina, all those things. So if you don't want that to be talked about in public or you don't want to have it out loud, you might want to pass by this one and or save it for a private moment or in your AirPods. I don't know. Any of those things. Because, last week, I realized that my IUD is overdue. So essentially, I've hit my 5-year mark with the Kyleena, and I'm not being sponsored by any of these right now, just FYI. We've had many episodes about IUDs on here. We've talked about it personally. I've talked about it personally. I know previous hosts Caroline and Kristen talked about it. Caroline talked about her experience, and they actually shared my experience too, which was hilarious because we had very different reactions to it. My first experience with IUD was so simple that I went running that same day because it did not bother me. I think it has a lot to do with your period pains in general. And I grew up with really bad period pains. So when getting that IUD in, I was like, okay, cool. I will say when I got my IUD in, my gynecologist, who is a woman, played it off really easily. It was like, you'll be fine. Because I was like, I heard these following things in which co-host Caroline at the time talked about it on here that she threw up. And she saw spots, and she had this really painful experience versus myself, who I was like, yeah, that's fine. Okay. She literally was like, you want to take some ibuprofen? Here's a little local anesthetic, and done. And it pinched, and I moved on. Getting it removed, because right as the Trump administration came in, I was kind of on the edge of this is the time I'm supposed to get it taken out. And she was like, well, technically, the IUD I had previously, the Mirena, can last up to 7 years. So she's like, you could wait. And I was like, but it's the Trump administration, and I don't know what's going to happen and what's going to be no longer allowed or banned. So I was like, let's go ahead and change it. It's 5 years. Let's go ahead and change it. And so I got my new one. So I've now hit my 5-year mark since then. Yeah, it was around that time. It was happening. Things were happening. Roe v. Wade was looking really precarious. We were all like, oh my God. So I got it changed, and now I've hit my 5-year mark, and I'm like, okay, let's go back. And I've kept essentially the same gynecologist. I really liked her. She was a younger, non-white person as my gynecologist. Again, like I said, her reactions to oh, you'll be fine. these are the things. And I was. When I was initially back and getting a new one, it pulled. It hurt. Actually, getting it changed out hurt a lot more than either one. The getting used to it hurt a lot more because it took me 6 months to get used to it. So getting past those marks were a big deal. And I understand people are like, I don't want to do this. And I get that. Getting past that has been amazing because I've not had a period in 10 years. And I am not unhappy about it. Every now and again, I get the phantom pains, PMS period pains, that I'm like, oh, why is this? Because it's not accompanied by actual period blood or blood. I don't realize what it is. But I'm like, oh, but these are the symptoms. I do remember this. And recently it's gotten a little worse. And I'm wondering it's because I'm at the end of this IUD period, expiration, and so I'm starting to feel a little more pains. Still no bleeding, so I think I'm okay. But with all of that comes the horror in my mind of what if it's traveled? What is one of those things that has gone into the wrong place? It's gone into my uterus, and I'm really, this is going to be bad trying to get it out. What if I'm pregnant and it's an ectopic pregnancy, and because of the laws in the state of Georgia, I'm because they won't let me do what I need to do and think they're going to replant it or something, which is a misconception and not possible. I know I'm speaking to I'm speaking to our audience, so they know. I know. But just in case people were confused, that's not a thing. But all of that to say is okay, it's time for me to go. Last time when I went to see my gynecologist, she had an intern, someone in med school that was shadowing her. It ended up being a man. And I didn't love that. But because I don't know how to voice anything, and as secure as I seem and as bold as I seem, I'm very insecure and I don't want to rock the boat. So he came in with her and she's like, is this okay? And I was like, yeah, okay. And again, was not a huge fan of this, but he did some of the examinations and he was fine. But for many of us who have gone through trauma with men, didn't love this. It's like seared in the back of my head of like, oh my God, this is awful. I did not want this. Next go round, I ended up going seeing the gynecologist. My regular one was not available, so I saw a different woman, but they initially tried to give me a man. And I was like, no. That's the one thing I don't want. Please don't give me a man. Had a different young woman. She was fantastic. Didn't have any issues. She was confused because I essentially used my gynecologist as my primary care physician because I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I could do that. Okay, well, this makes it easier because I don't want to go to 10 different appointments for all the different things. I went in with her for a wellness check. Everything was fine. This time around, I was also ready to go. And they were like, can you come in today? We have a doctor so-and-so. I was like, wait, because the name was like generic enough that sometimes it's used for women. I know this. And I was like, is that a man? Like I had to officially ask. She was like, yes. And I was like, okay, no, I would rather be like, I'm uncomfortable with that. I'd rather this person that I've known. She's not available for a while because she's now popular and very, very booked. And she's like, well, the next available appointment is in 3 months. And I was like, good God, what? And I'm like, okay, well, just so you know, I need a new IUD. I'm having some weird symptoms. I'm a little worried. And like all these things. She's like, okay, well, we'll put you in for cancellations, yada, yada, yada. And which made me really think about the fact that there's a chunk of us, and this is historically and factually understood, that women typically prefer to have other women physicians for a gynecologist. Like that's been the statistics. That's in fact, here's what healthcareers.com says. It's impossible to ignore the fact that many women want a woman practitioner, says one doctor. That's because they feel most of the female physicians are more empathetic. Sometimes it is for comfort level since patients are in a vulnerable position during a pelvic exam. Lastly, an exam may be gentler since most women have smaller hands than their male counterparts. The preference for a female isn't just anecdotal. As a 2016 review in Obstetrics and Gynecology notes, the authors looked at 23 studies, including 14,736 patients, and determined that, quote, the majority of women surveyed, 50.2%, preferred female over a male OBGYN. 8.4 preferred a male, and surprisingly, 41.3 had no preference. So very, very, very small number of women are like, yes, I would rather have a man. Of course, this continues. There's no discounting the woman-woman potential for a warmer exchange in the office. And there's no question that it adds better communication between doctor and patients. It goes on to say, with this one woman doctor, she's enjoyed those patient relationships and knows they flourish because women are smart, talented, thorough, and empathetic to patients. Again, we had that earlier Monday Mini that Anney brought about patients going to women doctors are more likely to live.
Yeah,
less likely to die.
Better outcomes, yeah.
In general. And OBGYN, no exception. I think probably more so. And it goes on to talk about how specifically like what their conversations are like and what it looks like to have a woman kind of being like a mother figure or a sister figure being able to talk to you because they know how this feels. Although there is a reminder, because there's also been horror stories where women doctors do associate their own experience and displaces them onto their patients, and their experience may be completely different. So they may have, like me, not had that much pain, and so assume everybody's like that, which is not true, which is cannot be true. And there's different levels of pain. Also like with things like endometriosis and all those other unknown even ailments that happen that people have dismissed for years, that they are not often talked about enough. Again, we also talked about the amount of time that a person spends with a doctor. I will say my initial doctor, she was great, but then the second time along, even though she didn't remember me, it was much quicker. And maybe because she had like a fuller plate. The newer doctor that I'd gone to, the young woman, she was young and fairly new practicing. So she was a lot more like detailed with me. Also a lot more confused on some of the things I requested. I was like, oh, this is interesting. But all this to say, like, this was a back and forth in my head. Like, is there a reason beyond, like, what I assume? Again, for me specifically, yes, mine is a trauma reaction. And I don't think I ever told any of my doctors this. And this is where I'm like, just so you know, I have a vivid memory / dream of, like, one of the things that I remember and again, it may have been a dream, but it's associated with something because this was a young childhood where I was getting examined as a 5-year-old in a room full of men. And when I say examined, I'm talking about like a literal gynecological exam. Why would that happen for a 5-year-old? There's a lot of questions. I just have a vivid picture of being surrounded by men in a room while I was being examined. So like all these things, that is such a vivid and wild picture for me that scares the living daylights out of me, even to this age, because I'm like, these are some of the reasons I have repressed memories. I don't remember a lot from my childhood. I just know I have a lot of fear when it came to men in general and then growing up. So like all of that to say, for me, there was a reason like, no, I don't want a man. And of course, with that, there's this level of like, okay, but there is a bias, obviously, from me because of that trauma response. And it's not their fault and it's not my fault. And there have been articles upon articles, honestly, saying, please choose a man. And these are from, obviously, men. In fact, one article written by Dr. Laway Singh, who is a Singaporean OBGYN, is like, these are the 6 reasons you should, come to a man. Like he specifically says this. And then one says they can be easy to talk to. So I'm like, okay, so are women. Maybe more so. I don't know. And then the next one was males can understand female anatomy too. And I was like, okay, sure. The next one was like they are equally experienced, and that could be true. Like when it comes to like medical practices and learning, they all go through the same training, they all go through the same education. But once again, that personal experience can be different, as well as we understand that the narrative is that men often try to go higher up very quickly, so sometimes don't have that personal understanding. It says men could be easy to talk to. They said it again. I just realized
they really want you to know.
So like it's actually 5 reasons, and then he just added one more to it to give you 6. They are caring and humorous, and they broke the common stereotype. And I'm like, no, that's not actually true, because in a different article they talk about how gynecologists explain why there's so many men in the profession. And so I'm like, so many maybe in comparison to, they're not saying that it's more men, but they're saying there's a lot of men. Stanford's summary of the study noted that females typically requested females, possibly due to expectation of kindness and compassion, but then after initial awkwardness, female patients do seem to want male doctors. And in that article it says, at this point, the data shows that men tend to prefer gynecology while female trainees lean towards obstetrics, which focuses on pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period. This could also be down to gender-based hurdles. Gynecology is a slightly more surgical specialty compared to obstetrics, and surgery has always been a slightly more male-dominated area, which comes with its own challenges, a doctor says. Surgical training can be pretty intense with really long days, which can be tricky if you're trying to juggle training with having a family, and working part-time isn't always easy. The same doctor adds that women can also still face sexism in the workplace, though that is changing, and acknowledge that the issue she has raises also face women outside the medical profession. So yes, obviously that conversation is that sexism still exists, even in a field that's specialized for uteruses. So I find that interesting in that conversation, because in another article, they do talk about how oftentimes, even in the higher ups in this field, it's still men. So it is still dominated by men, even though there's lesser of them in this field. All of those conversations come into play. I found several articles, and I'm not going to get too much into it, about trauma-informed care for OBGYNs and what is noted. They do talk about clinical indicators of possible past sexual trauma, in which they say not able to feel fetal movement. Some women have numbed the part of the body. So apparently that could be a sign. Chronic pelvic pain, missed prenatal appointments, panic with vaginal exams, extreme anxiety, disassociation. So all of those things could be signs, but also all of those things could be coming because you're like, this is about my vagina and this is awkward. I don't know what to do, because it's so taboo in general. Like vaginas are so taboo in general, and people are ashamed of it. They have this shame culture of what it is, to the point that many people don't go to the gynecologist in general, when everybody desperately should do it. And they do tell practitioners, what they can do to minimize those types of pain, about like, they should be mindful of the imbalance of power. Yes, in this, the doctors have power. And then with that, of course, came article upon article about different abuse cases that happened that are all generally men. I didn't see any statistics that show that there were more cases of abuse in OBGYN than any other practice. I didn't see that. But the ones that I did see were all men. Like, it was a male practitioner. And that's, again, that small inkling of like, could this happen to me? Because there was like some of the witness statements were like, I thought this was part of the exam. And then realizing later that it was actually really sexual. And you're like, wait, what? And again, though, I know male OBGYNs, and they've talked about how like it's just a body part, just like any other thing, and they have no connection to it. And you have to disassociate because it's not sexual to them at all, which is what you want to hear. But at the same time, things have happened where it's like, but is it? And then there was one small article, and I realized this publication was an extremely right-winged teen magazine, which I've talked about before, and I believe we talked about them in our Christianity episode. But their title is, Male OBGYNs are some of the most prolific predators in society, and they're flying under the radar. So I don't want to play into that either, because I would say probably more like church priests and preachers, but okay, we'll just leave it there. But in that, like that's that conversation, like that does also, maybe that's a part of what's in my brain, that's a bias, that's like that fear could be true. I think about that with dentists too, though, because I've heard horror stories about dentists. Y'all, I'm having a good time. This has everything to do with my trauma. But again, it comes back to like, I'm interested in why men chose these professions more so than anything else. Not that they can't, and not that any profession is not, it should be wide open and should have open opportunities and equal opportunities. And we've always said that. But it does fascinate me about, why do men want to be in gynecology? Is it for the money? Is it easy? Because like we've talked about how like social work and teaching, it is mainly women-dominated fields. And then we have, but when a man does come in, they get celebrated a little more. So they're more like celebrity. And is that same level? Like they're like, oh, you're doing something unique. And like, you really care about women in this field, or you really care about children, which is such a feminine thing, and or any of those level, that I wonder if that's part of the appeal. But yeah, I just went down this rabbit hole of like, how often do we see this? How do we, I guess, combat it or ease our nerves? And should I have given this man a chance? Because I'm like, now I have to wait 3 months. Also, can we talk about the healthcare system that like, hey, I have these symptoms, I'm a little worried. And they're like, well, if anything bad happens, go to the ER or urgent care, which is like 10 times the amount of what you have to pay.
Yeah.
Our system's
It really is.
They're trying to kill people with uteruses and marginalize people. Anyway.
Yeah.
No, that's another episode.
I will say, I know I've told this story before, so I won't do it again, but I was traumatized by my first visit to a gynecologist, and he was a huge, broad man.
So it was a man.
It was a man, huge. And I was 15, and he didn't really tell me anything, and then he told me he was going to call my dad and tell him I'm pregnant. And if you've ever listened to 13 Days of Halloween, the first story I have on there, Red Velvet, is based on the trauma I went through after that. I wrote it in high school.
I feel like he should have been reported. Horrible. Is there a statute of limitations on that?
He legitimately traumatized me. And when that whole Trump thing was happening, I wanted to get an IUD, even though like I wasn't having sex, but I was just like, just in case. But I knew I was gonna need some kind of drugs or something.
Yeah.
I was gonna panic. So I never did it. But that's the extent of what we're talking about and why it's important. Because you shouldn't be afraid to get health care.
Right.
Just look after yourself.
Right.
But here we are.
Here we are. And I'll tell you in 2 months if everything's okay. 3 months.
Oh, I hope so. Yeesh. Wow. On that grim note, we have heard from so many listeners, unfortunately. We love hearing from you, but it's unfortunate how how many of you have had experiences like this. We appreciate you taking the time to share them because we do think this is really important to talk about. So if you would like to contact us about any of this or any resources or information, you can email us at stephanieandmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at Most Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff One Never Told You. We're also on YouTube and on TeePublic, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christine, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.